Interactive here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the date object in WatchOS, including how we can implement it in our watch face and how to customize it. We're going to be learning how to customize it both using our inspector, and we're also going to be learning how to do it programmatically, so kind of more behind the scenes. So to start with, you can see I'm on my project navigation folder here. I'm on my interface.storyboard for my watch app. Currently it's blank, there's nothing on it, and I'm kind of zoomed in a little bit to 200%, so it kind of feels bigger than it would actually be on the actual watch. Otherwise, you can see I have my inspector open on the right here, and down here is my objects library where I'm going to be selecting my date object. So if you've never used WatchOS before, you should know that it doesn't have as many objects as, say, an iOS app. It's kind of limited, of course, because it's a very, very small screen and it's kind of limited in that sense. On the other hand, what it does have, we can kind of play with and use to great effect. So let's go ahead and let's find our date object. You can see it's already kind of highlighted here. And by the way, with these objects libraries, if you click on it and then wait a second, it'll pop out a little definition. Of course, date, we know what it does. It's a date object that displays the current date and time, but maybe you don't know what it is otherwise, so you can kind of click on it to learn a bit about it. And the way we can bring it in, well, it's like you bring in an object anywhere else. So you can grab it and just kind of drop it wherever you need it. From here, you can select it, and using our inspector over here, we can kind of play with the formatting. So we can change the format of the date, we can change the date from short to medium to long, whatever it may be. And so let's go ahead and let's play around with some of this stuff and see how it changes our date object. So first of all, as you can see, you can't really position it manually. So you try to drag it around, it doesn't work. And that's because if I scroll down here in my inspector, my attributes inspector, you can basically set the alignment like so. So there's a section for alignment, horizontal, vertical. Here you can play with the size, the width, and the height. You can play with the alpha channel, which controls the opacity. And otherwise, you can change the formatting of the date and the label type stuff. So let's go ahead and let's do some of that stuff. So really, this is the best way to kind of learn, is just kind of tinker around with it, see what works, see what doesn't. We can also kind of resize it like so. But let's just kind of leave it as it was, which was like this. And format, it kind of defaults to a standard format. You can customize it as well, of course. So if I were to click customize, it would give me some drop-down options to change how it looks. We might have a different way of displaying the date, and we can actually kind of just see that, and it'll give us a preview immediately, which is kind of nice. So day, month, year. So what would that look like? Well, it should show us in the little preview. Whoops, it should show us in a little preview down here. Right, so let's see if we go up. Yeah, so now it's showing the day first and then month second. And also, you know, it does display the time by default here in the upper right, so maybe we didn't want to see the actual hours and minutes. Well, we can kind of customize it in that way, just show it like that. Let's kind of play around with it some more. So for now, though, let's just set it back to standard, just so that we can see what it's doing, and we'll kind of expand it out. And then, of course, you can play with the text and the font as well. So text color, you know, let's try something crazy. Okay, that's kind of a nice hot pink color. From here, we can play with the font, of course. You just have to click the T. You can choose all kinds of different fonts. So if we want, say, some kind of system font for it to be maybe bold or heavy, we could do that. Right, that looks kind of neat. And you notice that it's kind of being truncated now, so it doesn't quite fit the window. In which case, we can play with this scaling. So this will allow the app to scale the text based on the size of its container. And it defaults to 1. 1 is actually the highest it can go. Otherwise, you can kind of bring it down. And this will basically allow you to make sure that it fits the screen if your text is too long. So here we're just scaling it down to 0.9, and that's small enough for it to fit. So we could go down even more, but it's not going to affect anything unless we start adding more characters into the text. You could also put this at 0, at which point it would understand that it wants you to put it at 0.8. So it kind of defaults to 0.8 if you have 0 in here. But you know what, let's just put it back to 0. You know what, let's put it to 0.8 actually. That seems like a good midpoint. And then from here, you can play with the alignment as well if you need to. So let's put on a couple date objects so we can kind of play with them. This one, we'll put it to the bottom. And we can do that very easily if we check out our alignment here. So currently we have horizontal left, but let's center it, and we'll put vertical at the bottom. Okay, so we have one date object up here, another date object down there, and that's pretty straightforward. For this one, let's give it a different color perhaps. This one, let's see, what do we got here? Let's do, I don't know, orange maybe? Yeah, that looks kind of neat. And then we can kind of play around with this in terms of the scaling as well. Let's give this one a different kind of date format. So we're going to leave it on standard, but we'll say make the date medium, or we could say make the date long. And time, we could just say, you know what, don't show us the time. Now we have that problem though where it's kind of being truncated, we're not seeing the full amount, so let's play with the minimum scale. Okay, there we go. Put this one at 0.8 as well. And now we can see, hey, that's pretty nice. What else can we do? We can change this font to be a different kind of font as well. So let's make this one, wonder what that does. Subhead, okay, kind of shrinks it. Let's give this one, yeah, this one's going to be italic. Okay, and what else can we do? Well, we could do, let's see, we could change the size. So we'll make it relative to the container. And this way we can kind of shrink it or grow it as needed, right? So now we're shrinking it down, and then it can't reduce the text anymore. So let's change the min scale. Okay, so that's going to make sure it's going to make it, smallest it'll go is 0.5 of the original size, 50% in other words. And now we have our tiny little date object down here and a bigger one up here. Alrighty. So as you can see, the date object, it's like any other object. You just kind of have to tinker with it to get it how you want it to look. Now let's investigate how we can kind of link this to the code and change some of this stuff programmatically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in another date object here. I'm just going to grab it and drop it right in the middle here. Let's align it so it's vertically centered. There we go. And this one we're going to kind of play around with in the code and see how we can edit the maybe appearance or the format in the background code instead of just playing with our inspector over here. So let me get rid of this side panel. And you know what? I'm going to get rid of this panel on the left as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the assistant editor. And you can do that if you've never done that before up here using these two rings that are kind of inside, two kind of concentric rings. So I click that, so it keeps our storyboard over here on the left, and then on the right we can actually see the code. So let me move this so it takes up less screen real estate. There we go. Okay, and then over here we can actually drag in an object and give it behavior and appearance. And it's actually quite easy to do that. And just as a quick overview, if you've never seen this kind of code before, so this is our interface controller, which basically controls the view here of our main storyboard interface. And it's a type of WK or WatchKit interface controller. And this just overrides some of the basic functionality, which means if you want to add some of your custom behavior, you can put it into one of these methods, or you can create your own method. And it also kind of helps us with comments here on how to, for example, configure interface objects, or something like will activate. This method is called when the watch view controller is about to be visible to the user, so any last minute things you need to initialize, probably going to want to throw it into will activate. Otherwise, Apple instructs us to initialize. Usually we're going to put it into our function awake method here. But before we get to that, let's make some space at the top, and I'm going to drag this object, and I'm going to control click. So I'm holding down the control key and I clicked. And now I'm just dragging it over into here, and we're going to create an outlet. And you can see you can't change it. It's always going to be a type of outlet. The other option is action, which you can't do for date objects like this. Name, I'm going to name it outlet my date. And outlet, I just kind of like to put it what it's doing so that it's clear to me when we have a variable. Is it an outlet or is it an action? And then you can see type. Well, can't really change the type either because it's always going to be interface date. And let's just click connect and watch what happens. So connect, you'll see it created an IB outlet. So IB stands for interface builder, and because we're taking it from the outlet, we're kind of connecting our storyboard here to our code. You can see us declaring it as a variable here. So variable outlet myDate is a type of WatchKit interface date. Okay, so that's nice. And now we can kind of use our variable to set it and make other changes to it wherever we need to. So probably the simplest thing to do here is to set the color. So we can actually do that programmatically instead of the other way, which was to bring out our attributes inspector and make it just manually change the color there. Maybe sometimes you're going to want to do this programmatically, which we can explore later on. But for now, let's just say you want to configure it to be a certain color. Well, because our variable here is a type of WatchKit interface date, there's a couple methods available to us built in that we can use. One of which, so let's do it here, outlet myDate dot set color. You can see that it has some autocomplete stuff going on here. So we're not setting the calendar right now, we're setting the color. And it accepts a UI color, set text color. And what color do we want? Well, let's do a UI color of, let's see, maybe green. That'll stand out pretty well. And so this will allow it to go green. And this is how you set UI colors. So you basically call dot color on the UI color. And so let's just see if this works. And what we can do is we'll run this in the simulator. So I previously set our simulator up here, and we'll just hit run. Okay, stop the current session of our simulator, and we'll rerun it with our WatchKit app here that we're creating. And let's just see what it looks like. So we should have purple or pink on the top, orange on the bottom, and theoretically green in the middle. So there it goes. And hey, there we go. So we, it's kind of small, so I can kind of zoom in a little bit, but we see that our watch simulator, it's working, it's setting the color, and it just has the default formatting on it. And that's how you can basically set the color. Whoops, pretty straightforward, really. Get rid of that there. Pretty straightforward. So let's see some other cool things we can do. So, what would be handy would be if we could set this to a different time zone. And that's something that would actually be nice to have in a watch app. So you pull up an app and it shows you your time zone, where you are currently and maybe somewhere else that you could set it to, for example. So how would we do that? Well, let's see if there's a built-in method for that. And this is one way I like to learn whenever I'm learning something new, is just kind of tinker around with it. So we can say outlet myDate, so we're calling the variable here, dot set, and I can actually see it already, set time zone. So let's get it to autocomplete here. Set time zone, and then it asks what time zone do you want to set it to. So it's smart enough to understand that, which is pretty neat in my opinion. Then we can use ns time zone, and we pass in the name of the time zone we want to display. So for example, if we wanted to see Eastern Standard Time, for example, EST. Okay, close that off. Probably give us an error because it says, hey, this needs to be of type time zone. Yeah, so cannot convert value of ns time zone to expected argument time zone. So because this WatchKit interface date expects time zone instead of ns time zone, we can just kind of alias it. So we can just kind of double click this fix it. And handy feature of Swift is that it'll often provide valuable hints for us to fix our code. Okay, so now this should work. So we are passing it basically ns time zone as aliased as a time zone. It's going to try to put it to Eastern Standard Time. I believe that's the abbreviation for Eastern Standard Time. Let's see what happens. So let's try to run it, and we'll run it in our simulator, of course. And so first of all, it should be green. Second of all, it should be showing it as Eastern Standard Time. So we'll wait for a watch to pop up. There it is. Give it a second here, and it should load it. There it goes. Okay, and it looks like it is showing Eastern Standard Time. So I'm in Pacific Time currently, so it should be 3 hours ahead. And hey, it looks correct to me. So neat. So that's how we can set the time zone. And as you can imagine, this could be pretty useful, right? So imagine if you have, say, a watch app that's showing a different city, and within that city it's showing the time zone. And we can probably figure out how to do that here. But initially we can tell that, okay, this is how we can set the time zone. Pretty convenient. And not too difficult, right? We just have to know to use ns time zone and alias it. And yeah, so that's all there is to that. And you would kind of need to know this if you do want to set the time zone. Let's see if we can find it on our little inspector here, our attributes inspector. And I'm not sure that there is a way to set it on here, so you're going to need to know sometimes how to do it programmatically. An alternative way we could set the time zone using ns time zone is something like this. So let's just declare a constant. So let time zone equals ns time zone, and then we can give it an abbreviation, and here we can pass in a string. So for example, est, we pass it in here, and then down below we can be kind of a bit more clear in our intentions without muddling it up with a bunch of this ns time zone stuff. And we can basically pass it in our time zone, and it's probably going to tell us, hey, I don't understand this. Let's see what it does. And yeah, so telling us, hey, use of unresolved identifier time zone. Did you mean time zone? Well, yes, I did. Okay, and it's probably going to make us say it as time zone question mark as well. Yeah, there it is. Cannot convert ns time zone to expected argument, so we'll just kind of coerce it there. Okay, so kind of doing the same thing, but this way we kind of just declare it in a constant, and this will allow us to achieve the same thing. So let me launch this in the simulator just to verify, but just an alternate way, not really any better, but sometimes it's good to be clear in our intentions like this. Build succeeded, that's good. Let's check it out. So here it goes, and this is just a sanity check really, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. Yeah, so there it goes. And this way, if we ever needed to switch out the variable, we could just pass in a variable here, for example, and switch that on the fly. Another thing we can do here is we can set the calendar. And what that means is instead of showing just kind of the default Gregorian calendar, which is going to default to most of the time, which is the calendar that most of the world is kind of used to at this point, we could use a different calendar, which would be nice if we want to, say, create an app that shows what different calendars look like, for example. Or maybe we're making, I don't know, some kind of app to show a specific calendar. So let's say we wanted to see, for example, the Buddhist calendar instead of the Gregorian calendar. So let's see how we can do that. And it's actually not too different from setting the time zone. So let me add some space here, and we can actually just grab our variable again here. So outlet my date dot set calendar. You can see it's kind of auto completing there for me, and we just specify what kind of calendar object we want to use in here. So what we can do is we can do kind of like we did before with our set time zone. We can pass in an ns object, an ns calendar to be specific, and ns calendar has a bunch of identifiers associated with it that we can use as calendar, kind of like we're doing as time zone up here. So how would we do that? Well, we're going to give it an ns calendar object, ns calendar. Let's give it an identifier. Yeah, so you can see it's auto-completing for me. Identifier ns calendar dot identifier. Well, that's what I want to do. So we're going to give it an identifier here of ns calendar dot identifier dot. Then we just choose one of these options, and we're going to explore some of these in a second, but for now I see that Buddhist is the top choice. I believe it's all alphabetical in here, so we'll go with Buddhist just to see what it does, and it's probably going to tell me, hey, this has to be as calendar. Let's see what it says. Yeah, exactly. So cannot convert value of ns calendar to expected argument type of calendar, so we can just say, okay, fix it for us, and we'll just kind of coerce it or alias it as a normal calendar object. And let's see what this does. So we'll run this in the simulator and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, by the way, you can also hit Command R to run the simulator. And let's just see what it does here. Okay, give it a second to load. And yeah, I mean, this would be useful if you're making, say, an app that shows different calendar styles, for example, maybe a learning app or some kind of app just to show specifically what a certain calendar looks like. So here we go. This is what our Buddhist calendar looks like. And we have it set to Eastern Standard Time. That's why it's showing 12 something, that it's being cut off currently. But yeah, so this is how we can see different types of calendars. Let's kind of do our code like we did before for our time zone. So we'll just set a constant, and that will allow us to be kind of a little bit less lengthy here when we're passing in the calendar object. So let's say let Buddhist calendar equals, and we're just going to grab this stuff. Okay, and that should be the closing bracket equals that. Yeah, there we go. Then we can pass it in here. So Buddhist calendar. There we go. So now, again, a little bit more clear here in our code. Another thing I wanted to adjust was I noticed that it was kind of truncated. So if we notice here, it's doing the dot 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 thing. So let's set the min scale attribute so that it can shrink the text whenever we need to. So we're going to go to our attributes inspector, and we can just actually set it like so. Just give it, let's say it can scale down to 0.5. And let's give that a try. So I'm going to hit Command R. Okay, it's going to tell me, hey, stop the simulator if you want to run it again. So that's what we're going to do. And we'll just do a sanity check here, make sure that our constant is actually working and our min scale is also working. And we'll give it a shot to load here. It should just be a second. And this is going to be easier to see the actual full time. Yeah, there we go. Pretty cool. So let's explore some other calendars here. Create another variable here, and for that, I'm going to take a look at what the other calendars available are, and it's kind of a good use of our auto completion bit here, so we can kind of explore what there is in an easy to do way. So we can see, okay, so there's Hebrew, there's Coptic, there's Chinese, there's all kinds of different calendars here. So let's try, I don't know, let's try a Japanese calendar and see what that one looks like. So first of all, let's set this one so that it's Buddhist. So I don't want to actually change this one, but let's say Japanese calendar equals NS calendar, and we'll say identifier. Yep, NS calendar dot Japanese. Oh, dot identifier, right? Dot identifier dot Japanese. Okay, and we will just replace the variable here. And for now, I'm just going to comment this out so that it doesn't say, hey, you made this constant but didn't use it. And then I'm just going to pass the variable in here, the constant I should say. Japanese calendar as calendar. Okay, let's try that out. Let's see what that one looks like. So I'm going to hit Command R to launch this. And then after this, maybe we can see what it would look like if we, say, put a couple buttons into our watch app to switch the calendar style. That would be pretty neat, in my opinion. And we'll just wait for this to load up here. Okay, there it goes. And okay, so that's what the Japanese calendar looks like. So 11/9/28 H 12:50 p.m. And again, it's 12:50 just because we said show us Eastern Standard Time. If we are showing a Japanese calendar, you'd probably want to show Japanese time, but in our case, this is going to be fine. And yeah, so that's how we can kind of switch between calendars. So let's go ahead and let's add in a button so that we can actually make our calendar change the, make our app change the calendar date. So I'm going to go into the editor here, pop this guy out, and from the objects library, I'm going to add in a button. So as you can see, I have my objects library open down here in the lower right, and we can add in a button just by looking for a button. Right? And then we can just kind of drag this over. This is an object like any other. I'll have to just place it using one of these. So we'll say vertical center. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this button, we can add some behavior to it to kind of affect whatever variable we need to. In our case, we're going to be affecting this outlet for this date object. So let's just click and make it, say, change calendar. Okay, it's kind of just wide enough to have that. We're not going to spend too much time editing the button, but what we are going to do is we are going to connect it to the code and give it a function to actually change the look of our calendar. And so, yeah, that's good as it is. So let's open up our assistant editor here. It's going to open up on the right side. And the calendar, what we can do is we can kind of bring it over and kind of like we did these as outlets. So IB outlet, outlet my date. We can do the same for the button, but instead of making it an outlet, we can make it a function. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to control and click and drag this guy over. Where should I put it? Let's put it, yeah, let's put it down below here. And what I'm going to do is instead of connection outlet, I'm going to say this is an action. And that way, whenever a user taps the button, we're going to give it a specific action to do. And we'll say action my button. Right? Not super descriptive, but we don't have that many that many variables going on here or functions. So it's going to be easier to kind of understand. And then, so within the function, we just give it the behavior we want. So what we can do is we can just kind of grab the code from here. So I'm going to cut that. In fact, I'll grab the commented out part as well. Cut that, fix my spacing a little bit, and I'm just going to paste it inside the actual function here. And so now this won't happen until the button is pushed. But let's try it out. Let's see if it's working. So we're going to launch this. And you can simulate a tap just with a click in your simulator. You could change the behavior if you want to play around with the settings, but by default, it's usually just you click and it simulates a tap. In this case, it would be a tap on the watch face, of course. Okay, so that'll load up. It's kind of defaulting to Eastern Standard Time plus the Gregorian calendar for today. And if we tap change calendar, hey, pretty cool. So it shrunk it down so that it fit, and also it changed it to the Japanese calendar. Pretty neat. You can click it again. It's not going to do it because it's just trying to reset it every time to the Japanese calendar. But initially, that's what we wanted, right? We just wanted a button to change calendar. We didn't specify what it would do, so it's not a great user experience. But hey, we have a function now with a button, so that's pretty neat. And from here, we can do all kinds of neat things. Let me shrink that down.